The universe itself seemed to hold its breath as humanity prepared to demonstrate its true strength. Admiral Nolan Kennedy, a figure of iron resolve, stood on the bridge of the TCS Retribution. His daughter's death had hardened his heart against the Galactic Empire, igniting a thirst for retribution that burned as fiercely as the crimson supergiant Antares nearby. The vast armada, consisting of thousands of angular Terran battleships, poised like a spear ready to pierce the heart of the Empire. As the Benzite delegation entered the bridge under a flag of truce, their leader, Ambassador Wyzen, strutted confidently, flanked by his insectoid guards. Their compound eyes shimmered with a cold detachment, but Nolan's gaze was filled with unbridled contempt. The ambassador's voice was laced with condescension. "Limit yourselves to your home system, or face the consequences," he declared. Nolan's grip on his command chair tightened, his knuckles turning white. The memory of the cold-blooded destruction of the unarmed Terran merchant ship, the Aurora, and the death of his daughter Zara, played in his mind. "You have one Terran day to hand over those responsible for the Aurora massacre and withdraw all Imperial forces from our space," he countered, his voice a low growl of barely controlled rage. Wyzen scoffed, underestimating the resolve of a wounded humanity. "Or what? You'll attack us with this minuscule fleet," he taunted, unaware of the storm that was brewing just beyond his perception. A cold smile played on Nolan's lips. "Helmsman, take us out beyond the far orbital marker," he ordered crisply. The fleet moved as one, a silent, deadly specter of vengeance. As they passed the orbital marker, Nolan nodded sharply to his communications officer, who immediately sent a coded message. Data packets streamed from the Retribution, a silent herald of impending doom. Wyzen's face contorted with confusion and anger as a priority alert flashed across his display. "What is the meaning of this trickery?" he sputtered. "Our scouts report 2 million Terran warships just materialized above the throne world," came the panicked response from one of his aides. Humanity, it seemed, was no longer willing to cower. Under Nolan's command, they were ready to show the galaxy that Earth's might was not to be underestimated. The stage was set for a confrontation that would alter the course of interstellar history. The universe seemed to hold its breath as Admiral Nolan Kennedy prepared humanity for an impressive display of might. On the bridge of the TCS Retribution, he watched the vast armada of angular Terran battleships poised around the crimson supergiant Antares, ready to strike. The Benzite delegation's arrival under a flag of truce was met with Nolan's steely gaze, hardened by the recent loss of his daughter. The Benzites were oblivious to the trap they had walked into, boasting and threatening, unaware of the hidden Terran fleet. As they boasted of their empire's might, Nolan smiled coldly. The hidden armada of 2 million warships, equipped with dreadnoughts and supercarriers from past wars, had been safeguarded in pocket dimensions, ready to be summoned in humanity's darkest hour. This was Nolan's retribution. As the Benzite ambassador strutted onto the bridge, Nolan's hand slashed through the air, and the communication link went dark. "Activate the wormhole generators," he commanded. Moments later, the fleet plunged through swirling blue portals, emerging above the Benzite homeworld. The scene that unfolded was one of calculated destruction. Terran warships, with their advanced weapons systems, quickly overcame the planet's defenses. Nolan, watching impassively, ordered the deployment of ground forces to secure strategic locations and seize the Benzite shipyards. His commands were crisp, his demeanor unyielding, shaped by both vengeance and a strategic mind aiming for a lasting peace on Terran terms. As the battle shifted from space to the surface, Nolan ensured that the civilian population would be spared the horrors of war, directing the provision of medical and food supplies. This victory was not just a show of force, but a declaration of Earth's new place in the galaxy as a dominant power, ready to dictate the terms of peace and coexistence. Families once lived and laughed. There was only destruction. He recalled how Zara used to pepper him with excited questions whenever he sent back images of glowing nebulae and alien vistas from the Ions of explored space. Her eyes would go wide with wonder as she soaked up tales of his adventures now. Those eyes were forever closed, snuffed out by Benzite brutality. A pulsing alert dragged Nolan back to the present. Reese's face popped up on a secondary display expression grim. Sir, long-range scans have picked up a flotilla of Benzite heavy transports trying to flee the system trajectory, and emissions suggest they're carrying high-value targets, possibly the surviving leadership. Nolan felt a spike of rage when and his ilk were trying to scurry away like rats from a sinking ship, hoping to hide in some bolt hole until the storm passed. They thought they could escape judgment. "Not on my watch," Nolan growled. "Order the interdiction cruisers to activate their gravity well projectors. Let's see how far they get with a few localized black holes in their path. Reese nodded and barked commands into his headset on the tactical display. A dozen blue triangles representing the cruisers broke off from the main fleet and burned hard for the fleeing transports. One by one, the Benzite ships vanished from sensors as they engaged their hyperdrives, only to be violently dragged back into real space, caught in the unbreakable grip of artificial gravity. Wells transports immobilized. Admiral Reese reported, a hint of savage satisfaction in his voice. Shall I order the fleet to open fire? Nolan hesitated. It would be so easy to obliterate the helpless ships with a single salvo, to snuff out the architects of humanity's suffering in one glorious instant. But that would be too quick, too merciful. His daughter had been denied any shred of mercy. No, Nolan said, his voice cold and hard as vacuum. Dispatch Marine assault teams to secure those vessels intact. I want prisoners. The galaxy will see Benonite leadership answer for their crimes in a court of law. Let them feel the crushing weight of justice that they so arrogantly flouted as the first Terran assault pods latched onto the battered Benzite hulls like parasitic wasps. Another alert chimed on the comm panel. Ree skimmed the report, his frown deepening with every word. Sir, we have a situation. It appears the regional governors are abandoning the Empire en masse, with the home world in our hands and their fleets in tatters. They falling back to their personal farms and digging in. Nolan pulled up a hollow of the Galactic Empire's once vast domain. Like cracked spider webbing across a pane of glass, the map was now divided into a myriad of feuding factions as the governors carved out their own pocket empires. Each warlord had a stranglehold on their sector's resources and populace, transforming them into fortified bastion against outside aggression. In a matter of hours, the monolithic Galactic Empire had shattered into jagged shards. From a strategic perspective, this development was both blessing and curse. Sowing chaos in the enemy ranks would make it easier to subdue each splinter faction, in turn like a lion culling a herd of weakened prey. But Nolan knew that even a cornered animal could be deadly when fighting for survival. Rooting out every last petty tyrant would embroil the Terran fleet in a grueling campaign of attrition, costing untold lives and ships. And even if they emerged victorious, even if humanity ground the Benites to dust and took their place as masters of the stars, it would never erase the pain. It would never fill the yawning void in Nolan's soul, where his bright, beautiful daughter once resided. Vengeance was cold comfort against the unending ache of grief. The comp panel chimed a third time, the alert signal blinking crimson. Ree looked up sharply from his console. Dali just forwarded a burst transmission from the recon drones we left in Throne World orbit. You're going to want to see this now. With trembling fingers, Nolan opened the file. Zara's face filled the screen, her hair tangled and uniform torn, but unmistakably alive. Nolan's legs nearly buckled with relief. Dad, I don't have much time, Zara said urgently. When the Aurora was hit, a few of us made it to the escape pods, but our pod was intercepted by cry slavers. Nolan's relief turned to dread. The cry were a ruthless species known for exploiting the misery of the Empire-Terran war, growing rich by trading in flesh and contraband. They've taken us to a hidden slave depot in the Gorgon Nebula. You have to hurry, they're already. Zara's image dissolved into static. Set course for the Gorgon Nebula immediately, Nolan barked. Maximum burn. The fleet lurched into motion, the Retribution's powerful engine straining at the limits of their endurance. Nolan paced the bridge restlessly, each second feeling like an eternity. 2 hours later, the fleet decelerated at the outskirts of the Gorgon Nebula, a vast cosmic maelstrom of swirling gas and electromagnetic storms. Active scans were useless in the celestial miasma. Switch to passive sensors only, Nolan ordered. Look for any gravitational anomalies, neutrino emissions, anything that might indicate a hidden base. The bridge crew worked feverishly, probing the roiling nebula. With every detection method available, Nolan forced himself to breathe evenly, to focus past the fear claying at his heart. Admiral, I'm picking up an unusual concentration of silicate particulates in orbit of the third moon of GRS 1739, a sensor tech called out. Spectral analysis shows refined metals mixed in, could be debris from ship activity. Helm, get us there now, Nolan snapped as the fleet approached the green-tinged gas giant. A spread of plasma bolts lit up the void, hammering into the Retribution shields. Red threat icons blossomed on the tactical display as batteries of surface topaz cannons emerged from concealed imp placements on the moon's crat surface. All ships evasive pattern. Delta 5, Nolan shouted over the din of impact alarms. Get our Marines in drop pods. I want that base taken out. Scores of armored pods, little more than re-entry shells packed with battle-hardened Terran warriors erupted from the Retribution's launch tubes and plummeted toward the moon. Plasma blasts tore through the pod formation, burning men to ash, but the survivors landed with grim determination. Storming out with rifles blazing, Nolan gripped the arms of his command chair hard enough to leave D in the metal as he watched the Marines dig and trading fire with the base's fanatical defenders. The cry fought with the desperate savagery of cornered predators, inflicting grievous losses. But the turn pressed on driven by the cold fury of comrades butchered above the throne world. After an eternity of bloody attrition, the base's defenses crumbled. Nolan rose on shaking legs, a leaden weight in his gut. Commander Reese, you have the con. I'm going down there. The acrid stench of scorched metal and charred flesh assaulted Nolan's nostrils. As he strode into the captured base flanked by a squad of Marines, he barely noticed the bodies littering the blasted corridors, so focused was he on finding his daughter. A flicker of movement in a side chamber drew Nolan's attention. He shouldered past the guards and froze at the threshold. Zara lay on the blood-slicked floor, her broken body cradled in the arms of a young man. Nolan recognized the cadet's uniform. Kai, the boy Zara had mentioned in her letters, the one she had dreamed of exploring the stars with. Nolan knelt beside them, reaching out with a trembling hand to brush a strand of hair from Zara's face. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy with pain. Dad, she whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of her mouth. You came. Of course I did. Nolan choked out, I'll always come for you. Zara smiled faintly, I knew you would. I love you, Dad. Don't let this be for nothing. Don't let them win. Her eyes drifted shut, and she went. Finding his daughter. A flicker of movement in a side chamber drew Nolan's attention. He shouldered past the guards and froze at the threshold. Zara lay on the blood-slicked floor, her broken body cradled in the arms of a young man. Nolan recognized the cadet's uniform. Kai, the boy Zara had mentioned in her letters, the one she had dreamed of exploring the stars with. Nolan knelt beside them, reaching out with a trembling hand to brush a strand of hair from Zara's face. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy with pain. Dad, she whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of her mouth. You came. Of course I did. Nolan choked out, I'll always come for you. Zara smiled faintly, I knew you would. I love you, Dad. Don't let this be for nothing. Don't let them win. Her eyes drifted shut, and she went. Finding his daughter. A flicker of movement in a side chamber drew Nolan's attention. He shouldered past the guards and froze at the threshold. Zara lay on the blood-slicked floor, her broken body cradled in the arms of a young man. Nolan recognized the cadet's uniform. Kai, the boy Zara had mentioned in her letters, the one she had dreamed of exploring the stars with. Nolan knelt beside them, reaching out with a trembling hand to brush a strand of hair from Zara's face. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy with pain. Dad, she whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of her mouth. You came. Of course I did. Nolan choked out, I'll always come for you. Zara smiled faintly, I knew you would. I love you, Dad. Don't let this be for nothing. Don't let them win. Her eyes drifted shut, and she went. Still a last breath shuddering from her lungs, Nolan gathered her limp form to his chest, a wordless howl of grief and rage tearing from his throat. She led the captives in a revolt. When your fleet arrived, Kai said, hoarsely, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face, saved dozens of lives, but the Cathy overseer gunned her down. A cold mirror's clarity descended over Nolan, the universe narrowing to a single inexorable purpose. He reached for his comm link. This is Admiral Kennedy. I'm invoking Directive Omega-3. Deploy a Nova bomb on the Cry home world. Stunned silence greeted his words, then his voice filtered through tight with concern. Sir, Omega-3 is only to be used as a measure of last resort to prevent an existential threat to humanity. If we use it now, will be no better than the empire we fought to overthrow. They took my child, Nolan said, his voice leached of all emotion. They deal in misery and suffering. There can be no mercy, no quarter. Burn them from the stars. A shuddering boom echoed through the base as a miniature sun blossomed in the eternal night above the Cry home world, an expanding sphere of nuclear fire scouring the planet's surface clean of life. Nolan watched the apocalyptic blast on the view screen, feeling nothing but a yawning emptiness in the weeks that followed as the Terran fleet mopped up the last holdouts of Imperial resistance. Nolan walked the halls of the Retribution like a ghost going through the motions of command, but the fire that had driven him, the righteous cause that had sustained him through the long years of war, had gutted out, leaving only ashes behind. On the day the last Imperial warlord bent the knee to Terran authority, Nolan summoned Reese to his quarters. He removed the silver and gold insignia of a Retribution warrant from his collar and pressed it into her hand. The Empire is broken, but the galaxy still needs someone to guide it toward a better future, someone who hasn't lost their way. I'm done, Reese. I can't be the leader humanity needs, not anymore. It has to be you. Reese closed her fingers around the insignia, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. I'll do my best, sir, for Zara and for all the others who sacrificed so much. Nolan nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I know you will be better than I was, Reese. Don't let vengeance consume you as it did me. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind the uniform and the life he had once clung to so fiercely. Years later, an aged Nolan sat on a rocky promenade overlooking an endless alien sea, the stars of a foreign galaxy glimmering overhead. He had wandered far in his self-imposed exile, desperate to outrun the ghosts of his past. But as he gazed up at the infinite expanse above, he couldn't help wondering if Zara's sacrifice had truly changed anything, if the new order he had helped to build would endure or crumble like the one before it, if humanity would find a path beyond the cycle of destruction and retribution that had consumed him, and on nights when the weight of regret pressed down on his soul, when the memory of Zara's blood on his hands burned like a brand. Nolan wished he could go back to that fateful moment above the benzite homeworld to stay his hand from the course of total war, and find another way, a path of justice tempered by wisdom of peace, brought through understanding rather than force. But the past was immutable, and he was left to bear the bitter fruit of the choices he had made, choices that had broken entire worlds and shattered his own soul beyond repair. As a shooting star arced across the endless void, Nolan whispered a final apology to the daughter he had failed, to the man he once was. Then he closed his eyes, letting the cool night breeze carry away the tears he could no longer hold back. A final silent benediction to a life forever stained by the ashes of war. The year slipped by like grains of sand through an hourglass. Reese, now an admiral, led the Terran Confederacy's efforts to rebuild a fractured galaxy. She walked a tightrope between diplomacy and swift, decisive action against the most brutal warlords who refused to bend the knee. Nolan watched the new golden age take shape from afar, a silent observer withdrawn from the great game of galactic politics. He built a small homestead on a remote frontier world, a place where the only sound was the lonely whisper of the wind through alien trees. But even in this isolation, he couldn't escape the past memories of Zara, of the choices he'd made, haunted his every waking moment like restless specters. One morning, as Nolan sat on his porch nursing a mug of bitter cafe, a sleek Confederation shuttle descended from the lavender sky. It settled onto the packed earth with a hiss of hydraulics, kicking up a cloud of ruddy dust. Nolan squinted as the ramp lowered, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him, but the figure that emerged was no illusion. Kai, the young cadet who had cradled Zara in her final moments, strode down the ramp. His boyish features had hardened into the chiseled lines of a man who had seen too much too soon. The lieutenant bars on his collar glinted in the harsh sunlight. Admiral Kennedy, Kai said, his voice of somber rasp. Present me. We need your help. Nolan scowled. I'm retired, son. Whatever it is, it's not my problem anymore. I'm afraid it's everyone's problem. Kai held out a data pad, the screen flickering with dire reports. A new threat has emerged from the unexplored rim. They call themselves the Vorix Imperium. They're sweeping through Terran space like a plague, enslaving entire worlds and leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. Nolan turned away, his jaw clenched. Humanity seems doomed to lurch from one war to the next, an endless cycle of violence and retribution. I wanted to believe we could be better than that, but maybe it's just our nature. Maybe it's all we're good for. Kai stepped forward, his eyes blazing with conviction. Zara gave her life fighting against that idea. She believed in a future where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them. If we give in to despair, if we let the Vori run rampant, then her sacrifice meant nothing. Nolan felt a stirring in his chest, a flicker of the old fire that had once driven him to the edges of known space and beyond. He looked at Kai, seeing the ghost of the man he used to be reflected in those fierce, determined eyes. All right, Nolan said at last, his voice rough with emotion. I'll hear Reese out for Zara. If nothing else. The shuttle ride passed intense silence. Nolan stared out the viewport, watching the stars streak by in blurred lines of light. When they finally dropped out of warp, he felt his breath catch in his throat. The Retribution hung in orbit above the shuttle, her hull scarred and pitted by the ravages of time and war. But even in this battered state, she was still a magnificent sight, a testament to the ingenuity and tenacity of the human spirit. Reese greeted Nolan in the hangar bay, her face lined with the weight of command. She clasped his hand firmly, her eyes searching his face for the man she once knew. I wouldn't have asked you to come if the situation wasn't dire, she said. Without preamble, the Vori have pushed us back to Antares, of all places, the site of our first great victory against the Empire, now our last line of defense. Led Nolan to the briefing room, where a holographic display of the Antares system rotated slowly above the table. Red icons representing the Vorix fleet blinked into existence at the edge of the system, vastly outnumbering the blue markers of the belled Terran ships. Their technology is like nothing we've ever seen, Ree said grimly, some kind of reality-bending weapons that can tear ships apart at a quantum level our conventional defenses are virtually useless. Nolan studied the display, his mind racing. The old thrill of the hunt, of pitting his wits against a worthy foe, thrummed through his veins like an electric current. In the days that followed, Nolan threw himself into the battle preparations with a fervor that surprised even himself. He pored over the sensor logs, analyzing the Vori fleet's every move. And then in a moment of blinding clarity, he saw it, a complex but repetitive P in their formations, a dance of destruction that seemed to power their impossible weapons. There, Nolan said, stabbing a finger at the display, that's the key. If we can disrupt their formation at these critical junctures with precisely timed gravity well pulses, their own weapons will tear them apart from the inside out. Reese nodded slowly, a grim smile spreading across her face. It's a hell of a gamble, but it's the best chance we've got. As the Vor's fleet bore down on Antares, the Terran ships moved into position. Nolan stood on the Retribution's bridge, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched the dance of the Vor ships, waiting for the perfect moment. Now he bared all ships activate gravity wells. Space itself seemed to shudder and convulse as the Terran fleet unleashed their secret weapon. The Vori ships shuddered and twisted, their hulls warping and buckling as their own reality-bending fields turned against them. In the chaos, Nolan saw his chance. He turned to Ree, his eyes blazing with a fierce, reckless light. "I'm going over there," he growled. "Zoloth is mine." Before Reese could protest, Nolan was gone. Leading a desperate boarding action onto the Vor's flagship, he fought his way through the alien corridors, his rifle spitting death with every step. And then on the shattered bridge of the flagship, he found himself face to face with Emperor Zoloth himself. The alien warlord was a towering figure, his Kittis armor glinting in the hellish light of his dying ship. Zoloth lunged at Nolan with a roar, his bladed arm slashing through the air. Nolan met him head-on, his rifle forgotten, his fists and feet lashing out in a brutal primal dance. They traded blows across the bridge, smashing through consoles and bulkheads, neither giving an inch, but Nolan could feel his strength waning, his body battered and broken by the relentless onslaught. With a last desperate surge of effort, he launched himself at Zoloth, driving his combat knife deep into the warlord's neck. Zoloth staggered back, black ichor gushing from the wound he collapsed to the deck, his eyes dimming as the life drained out of him. Nolan slumped against the bulkhead, his vision blurring, his life bleeding out onto the cold metal floor. As he drifted towards the waiting dark, a figure appeared before him, glowing with an ethereal light. "Sarah," Nolan whispered, his voice a ragged gasp. "If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video, then leave a comment that says, 'I like the story,' and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time."